Hey guys, Pete here. Today we'll pick up on the problems in Game of Thrones Season 8 series. Last time we talked about the problems with the Night King story, and today we'll talk about the Iron Throne. I decided to do this problem series because the ending is difficult to figure out for a number of different reasons. Focusing on problems is a way to work through it. It's not a series saying that Game of Thrones Season 8 will be bad because of this and this and this. Actually, I'm rooting for the end of the series to be good, and I think it will be. But when trying to sift through all the textual evidence in the books and what we've seen in the show so far, I find it hard to see what that good ending actually looks like. A big part of why I keep running into problems is because we don't expect the ending to be predictable. The bar has been set pretty high with strong character development that has us all plugged in, but there's also quite a lot that fits into common recurring literary devices. For instance, one of the main characters grew up as a bastard boy who didn't know who his real parents were. He's gone off to live a life of service, protecting mankind against a threat that they forgot actually exists. Turns out said bastard is actually the heir to the throne with an impressive bloodline. And that threat that had disappeared for thousands of years is actually on humanity's doorstep trying to get in. Now he's primed for a hero's journey, and that has problems that we'll discuss in a different video sometime this week. But you get the picture. We have a story that isn't supposed to be that same fantasy story, but happens to have all the elements of that fantasy story. This presents problems, and let's jump into looking at the ones that the Iron Throne itself presents. As we all know, the Iron Throne is the seat of the king, or currently the queen, of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. The political intrigue and jockeying for power around the throne is where we get the name Game of Thrones for the series. One of the first aha moments you get reading the books is that, wait a minute, everyone is focused on the Iron Throne, but the story is really about the threat of the White Walkers. Who is the king isn't really going to matter when everyone is fighting to survive. This is sort of true, but then you realize that, as I said in my last video, the living will triumph over the dead. That means that life has to go on after the War for the Dawn, and that means that the Iron Throne is a factor in the end of the story. As we near the end of the TV series, it's clear that the throne might not be the most important thing at the beginning of Season 8, but it is still very important. This is the first problem with the Iron Throne, that it isn't a point of focus for the characters who are most likely to sit on it right now. The battle with the Night King and the White Walkers is and should be the only thing Jon and Daenerys are thinking about. As far as they know, Cersei is on their side in this battle, which means the whole idea of the crown or the throne is out of the picture. When Jaime arrives in the north, they'll find out about her double cross, but at that point it's going to be too late to really change anything. This really hit me as a problem when I watched the trailer for the first time, the Season 8 trailer. We have this existential threat of the White Walkers and the army of the dead, and the power of the throne is still so compelling that Cersei is basically double-crossing humanity in order to hold on to her seat. In a way, it's hard to imagine, but at the same time, you can kind of see where she's coming from. She really has nothing left if she doesn't have the Iron Throne. This leads into the second major problem, and that is the power of the throne and the system itself. Obviously, watching this series or reading the books or however you came across this story, you realize that it's not a pro-monarchy kind of piece. It isn't saying, like, look at this great system of government they have placed in this world, it's definitely got problems. As long as there is a throne, there will always be people who are trying to get ahead in that system, and there will always be struggles for power. You can see that in the history of Westeros and with all the secession problems that have happened and all the war and pain and suffering that's been taking place since this series started. I'm not sure if the show really points it out as much. I mean, it's definitely there, it's hinted at, but the small folk have been suffering tremendously since the War of the Five Kings. So just to make sure we're on the same page here, this is definitely not a pro-war kind of story, and it's definitely not a pro-absolute monarchy kind of story. So on the one hand, we agree that the throne is important, but on the other hand, we can also agree that what it represents is not a good system of government. When I first really got into reading theories and, just sort of engaging in the fandom around A Song of Ice and Fire, there was a theory that was popular. I would say it was popular that Tyrion would help to install a democracy. And I'm not sure if it's still popular or if it, really is the way people think things are going to turn out. But it is a sort of natural conclusion when you see how the story points out all the flaws in this system. As I mentioned earlier, you kind of get that idea when you're reading that the throne doesn't matter at all, because in the end, it just won't be that important. In my 10 things that have to happen in order to make this series end successfully video, I talked about, though, that we do need to understand that there is a government in place when things are done, and that starts with the Iron Throne. But when there's an Iron Throne, there will always be some sort of a Game of Thrones that goes along with that. And that leads us into the next problem, and that is that none of the characters who might end up on the throne necessarily seem like they would be the right candidate. Now, I know that George R.R. Martin has said, when talking about the end of the series and how what he knows about the end of the series, like what he told the showrunners, he said directly, "I know who will sit on the Iron Throne." I'm not sure if that is to mislead us, it's used to mislead us, but if you take it at face value, he says that someone will actually be sitting on it when the story comes to an end. Since we're expecting some kind of a subversion of the whole hero's journey, it makes it really hard to figure out how that plays out. Of course, we have Daenerys Targaryen, and she has a trajectory that she believes ends with her sitting on the Iron Throne at the end, taking back what's hers by her birthright. But we actually know that she is not the legitimate heir now that Jon would be. Neither one of these characters are necessarily the right fit. Because this story is told in a way that really makes it relatable and great, in my opinion, all of these characters have their problems. There's really no one thing that you could say is like, hey, okay, well, that makes sense. If that person ends up sitting on the throne at the end of the series, I'll feel good about the way life will carry on in the Seven Kingdoms after that. All of that leads me to believe that Westeros will be changed. I mean, they're in this battle, the War for the Dawn. It will definitely be changed as a result of that. But how do we get to the point where we're like, okay, this makes sense? Changing the system of government, it sounds like a good idea at first, but then, say that out loud, that it ends with democracy being put in place. Like, does that really sound like an awesome ending? Not exactly. You might like to believe that the people would be more involved, and that does sound more realistic, right? Something that could work. But if you think about it beyond that, what has happened in any of the characters' stories that really puts them in the place to get that going? Obviously, Daenerys had good intentions whenever she ruled. Obviously, Jon has made some good decisions as far as doing things for the right reasons. But there's really no situation where either one of those people rule in a vacuum and everything that they want to have happen, all their good intentions play out. And I will do problems with each of those characters individually in this series later on, where I look at that more directly. But it is a big problem. This is the way the show has set up conflict leading into this hidden battle with the dead. And in order for the story to come full circle, we have to feel good about what might happen in the future. The last book of the series, which we'll hopefully get at some point, is called A Dream of Spring. So what does A Dream of Spring actually look like? Also, I'm not overlooking the fact that we have pretty good evidence that King's Landing is going to take a hit, if not be destroyed, as a result of what comes after the War for the Dawn. Of course, Daenerys saw the throne room destroyed in her House of Undying vision, and also Bran saw that again later on when he was in the Weirwood net, so that probably is going to happen. I guess if we take those scenes literally, though, the throne is actually there. Whoever's left alive to sit on the throne could melt it down and pass on some new form of government, but it's just really kind of difficult to see where the show is taking us. Do you think that any of the characters in the story now would be a good fit for the Iron Throne in the system that we have? Or do you think that that system has to be changed in order for us to have a satisfied ending? I do think that things will be changed. I think that part won't be that difficult. I obviously don't think Cersei can remain on the throne. I fear that she is irredeemable at this point. But I don't know who will survive. I've made my predictions about that. And I don't think it really works if you just put the hero on the throne and call it a day. Like, I think there has to be something much more interesting up George R.R. Martin's sleeve. And I'll leave it to you guys to tell me what you think. Let me know in the comments where you see problems, what you think a good solution might be, and really anything you're thinking about as far as we lead up to this, because I think we're about 3 weeks out now. We're getting pretty close, so it's getting pretty exciting. The next part in this series will be coming soon. It'll probably be about Jon or Daenerys. I have a couple other ones lined up too, so make sure you check back. If you want to follow along with the series or with Season 8, you know what to do. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.